All right. Hello. Welcome to the Outreach Debate Introduction to Policy Debating in LD, also known as LARP, short for Live Action Role Playing. We're going to be covering how to construct a LARP AF, the basics of disads, counterplans, and then some defenses of things like the policymaking framework, an offense-defense paradigm, and things like framework against a critique. So, first thing is, what is LARP debate? It is live action role-playing policy debate. The idea is these are arguments that are most typically read as technical, substantive arguments that do not seek to moot the case, seek to directly engage with these arguments. And though a distinction is kind of iffy, but it's what most PFers would refer to as not prog. It consists of off-case positions, such as offs or independent offensive reasons to win. These include procedurals, the counterplan, the disad, and also typically feature big stick extinction level impacts with little discussion of things like a value or value criterion. Those things are largely left in the dust in favor of a standard. Start with the 1AC, which is the most important part. It is the nexus point of debate. It is what most of the round is going to revolve around. It first starts with the hedge. If there's any theory you want to preempt, you can do it now. If you're breaking a new AF, you can put a really quick blurb like new AFs are good, maybe things like hiding certain arguments like non-resolutional theory bad. This is really not that important, but it's usually what you start out your 1AC with. But then next is a plan, which is the nexus point of debate. You can either put this at the top or the bottom. Where it is really doesn't matter. The only thing that matters is what it is. It is, are you just going to be defending the entire resolution? There are a lot of resolutions where you can just defend the whole thing and get away with it. Things like the September, October living wage, the November, December wealth tax. You can defend the entire resolution on these kinds of things. But the main point of a plan is that you are trying to make a small AF. You have the resolutional circle, and then you have the plan inside of that. It is an example of why the resolution would be good, but it is smaller than the actual entire resolution, so it can avoid core topic generics. The idea is, let's say we have a wealth tax. A plan under the wealth tax would be a carbon wealth tax, a smaller subset of the resolution that still proves that we would need a wealth tax. Just what new distinct advantages can we gain out of that that we couldn't gain out of the entire resolution? There are a couple of things that you can read on the screen if you want. The second thing that you need to keep in mind is, are you going to be engineering this to go against a couple procedurals? Is there any vagueness in needed specification? Can you defend topicality on this certain kind of argument? Can you defend yourself against different types of topicalities? Are you extra topical? Are you vex topical? Are those things that you can defend? Is your model defensible? All those things are incredibly important. Then what disads are intrinsic? What negative ground are you allowing? What negative ground do you not want to be read? What arguments do you want the negative to make? Then counterplan competition. What can they pick out of? When are things like, do you want to avoid using resolutional language? Do you want to use resolutional language? Does it link to any critique? How would it materially challenge power structures? I used to read for my career this past year. I read two different AFs. I read one AF against K debaters and one AF against other LARP debaters. The K one would typically feature warming impacts or things that can easily be spun to help permute the K as opposed to go for the impact turn. Things are like, is it solvent? What mitigatory defense could you read? Are you going for an impact turn as an AF? There are things that people read, such as degrowth, that are just impact turning the entire idea like of a link chain, how to use the plan for productive ends, things like that. Then you have the advantages, which are logically tied to the plan. These are just contentions. These are basically just arguments you're making in favor of the resolution, reasons why the plan is a good idea. These should come up from research on topic mechanisms, i.e., if you're wondering how a wealth tax would work, you are then going to find reasons why a wealth tax is good. Then, fourth is framing. Framing is one of the least important parts of a just pure policy throwdown because nobody's contesting the idea that extinction is bad. The idea is the value is always going to be morality. The standard is going to be your value criterion. It's going to be util and extinction outweighs some combination of the both. And then fifth is framework, or the idea of how the procedural questions that are in the debate. It is not necessarily a delineated roll the ballot, roll the judge. Maybe this is just like a weigh the case kind of thing, only weigh opportunity cost of the plan. These are different arguments that you can make and things that you can do to preempt the critique. Maybe on the framing level, you can say, okay, here's certain arguments we want you to make. Here's certain things like, okay, fiat is good. Maybe like things like growth is good, hegemony is good, debates about IR are productive and good. all those things to try to take the load off of the 1AR. The idea is you want to have enough defense in the 1AC to the point where you can use 1AC evidence as 1AR blocks. That saves a lot of time, especially because the 1AR is incredibly time crunched in LD, and you have to make sure that there's a lot of defense in the AF to compensate for that. In terms of an offense defense paradigm, offensive arguments are reasons why the judge should actively vote for you. These are things like advantages of the plan. Defensive arguments are the reasons your judge should not vote for your opponent. Things like a non-unique on a disad, like, okay, this is going to happen anyways, does not mean that you shouldn't vote AF, but it also means that you shouldn't vote neg. And here's how to turn defense into offense, because the best thing that any smart 1AR can do is do exactly that. You have to switch solvency deficits into solvency advocates. Only we can solve for X thing. Going for the straight turn is the best idea of this. The straight turn is basically saying, okay, in the status quo, this disad argument is not happening or it's low. That is bad because we want this thing to happen. Only the AF can generate X, like say a political momentum to do that thing. It's a straight turn because it's a non-unique or a low uniqueness combined with the turn, a link turn. We flip the link, maybe we're anti-capitalist. These are things like against a critique. Even if you like turn things back, like, okay, this argument is inevitable to only the negative or only the status quo is going to lead to this scenario happening. Next part is a disad. This is the core negative argument, and you've probably used it in most of your LZ rounds without even noticing. There are three types, and there's also certain flavors of disad. The traditional disad is going to be uniqueness good, like things are going good right now. The status quo is a good option to stay at. But the plan does something that's bad. That leads to a bad scenario. That leads to a bad terminal impact. Most of the time, this is extinction, either through disease, warming, whatever litany of impacts you have at your disposal. There's linear impacts, whereas the uniqueness is like the status quo is like, all right, like we're going here, but the plan takes that down, starts going here, that triggers an impact. The difference between the two is the uniqueness. Either the uniqueness on the traditional side is the status quo is good, versus the uniqueness on the linear side is we're going to see this impact happen. It's just a matter of when, and the app flips that time frame, so it's a lot worse. And then Brink is going to be like we're basically at the edge of the cliff. We have this guy over here, he's at the edge of the cliff. The plan pushes us over the edge. Here's an example on the unclosed topic. It's the biotechnology dissad. It basically says, first, you can read it if you want on the screen. Marine biotech engineering is successful now. We're making big breakthroughs in pharma, things like biologics, things like genetic therapeutics, all are making good progress. But joining UNCLOS would force technology transfers and IP sharing. Those directly hurt innovation because they create disincentives for unique research and development because everyone has to share everything. The internal link is what triggers the scenario. Things like pharma is key again to hedge against pandemics, things like that. And then the impact would be pandemics are existential. Here's an example of an agenda politics dissad. The politics dissad is one of the most common dissads because it typically links to everything, and you can find reasons why the plan would be politically unpopular. The idea would be a certain policy, like the 2025 Farm Bill, is passing right now, or is going to pass. But both are politically unpopular, meaning that the president has to use political capital or sign like currency among politicians to get it through. If we use too much political capital to get the plan through, then we won't have enough left over for the farm bill. That's going to trigger the link, and then the internal link is the farm bill not passing would be disastrous because the farm bill is key to agriculture. Food wars would equal extinction. On answering disads, there's a bunch of ways you can do it. You can read them all on screen. No uniqueness is basically, okay, your disad scenario is going to be inevitable. It's either going to happen now, never going to happen, or has already happened. No link is the app won't do this. Like, let's say we've read a plan text that does the plan, like it phases it in. Things like disad's premised on the plan being an incredibly big shock to the economy probably wouldn't work as much because the plan is being phased in. There's no link to this disad because it does not represent a financial shock to the system. A link turn, maybe the AF is actually good for this disad. Things like Russia leaving UNCLOS. Joining UNCLOS would be good to keep UNCLOS coherent. No internal link turn are all things related to whether a scenario can happen or whether a scenario is good. And an impact turn is just Things like, okay, growth is bad, maybe we should degrow the economy. Pandemics are good because they increase like cohesion. Maybe things, there's a bunch of weird things like nuclear war, spark, wipeout, all things like extinction good. And then impact weighing, obviously, like even if the dissat happens, either there's a low risk of it, the impact scenario isn't that big, or the F just dead ass outweighs on time frame or something. Next big thing is counterplans. What are counterplans? Counterplans are opportunity costs to doing the affirmative. They are typically fiated by the negative, although there are status quo counterplans that are not really that relevant. The idea is all counterplans should be mutually exclusive. This is called competing with the affirmative. They should solve the entirety of the affirmative, as in resolve all of the advantages or stop the scenarios, have an added internal net benefit. This is not really necessary because counterplans can compete off disads, but yes, they should have an added net benefit. It does not necessarily need to be internal, but they should have a net benefit to doing the plan that not doing the counterplan would forgo. Competition is a very big thing, and we're probably going to make another lecture about it in its entirety. But the idea is, does doing the AF stop doing the counterplan, or is there a reason why the counterplan alone would be preferable, right? The idea is counterplans compete off of two things. The idea is the counterplan not the AF? If it competes via text, it's saying it literally does not have the same text as the resolution, right? Think things like if you're picking out of resolutional words, things like, okay, we're not going to pass a carbon wealth tax, we're going to pass a user fee, maybe things like, and or things that functionally change what the app does, things like, okay, we're picking out of the word artificial intelligence in the March-April 2025 resolution, we're going to change that to cognitive computing that has a function of changing XXXXX, or maybe we're giving a wealth tax to everyone, but we're going out of our way to change how the wealth tax works. Those are all functional ways to compete. Then we have solvency. Does the AF get away not doing the plan? Because if you're not solving for the impacts of the AF, then the AF can logically weigh, hey, you're not passing a wealth tax. You are not solving any of our advantages. A solvency deficit to a counterplan is a reason the AF is better, or a reason to at least prefer the perm, which we'll get into later. And then net benefits. Is it internal or external? Things like a process counterplan have intrinsic reasons why changing the way the plan works are intrinsically good. External is, okay, the plan avoids a disad. Then most counterplans will have both of them. And then there's also the status of a counterplan. I think that's the next slide. No. Okay, here I'll talk about it here. They have condo, which is you can kick it at any time. Uncondo, you can never kick it. And dispositional, which is you can kick it on certain conditions. We'll talk about that later. The types of counterplans are very distinct. There are advantage counterplans, which are unrelated to the resolution of the question. They typically don't do things that are part of the resolution. There's something completely different that solves the impact. For a carbon wealth tax, an advantage counterplan would be the United States should divest from the carbon bubble. It should do XXX. It should invest in things like innovation. It should do, and all these things are typically re-highlighted from 1AC evidence that says these are alternate ways to solve advantages, which are defense to the necessity of the plan. The plan is not necessary. And this is typically tied with the disad to say, hey, there are ways to solve the AF without triggering X disad. Then we have agent counterplans. You're doing the AF with a different actor. Things like 50 states counterplans, things like the uncooperative federalism counterplan, doing the plan through the courts, doing the plan through the Fed, like a user fee, things like that all change the agent of the plan. A lot of people argue that this isn't an actual opportunity cost, and it's a great article by Evan Alexis as to why, but that is that's like out of the scope of this lecture. But agent counterplans typically are one of the most like fruitful generics on any topic because the state's counterplan is always going to be there as long as the USFG is doing the plan. And then we have the process counter plan, which is doing the app obviously through a different process. And it's typically some legal thing like, okay, we should do it through the states, or not through the states. We should do like a signing statement. We should have the courts pressure, or we should have the states pressure the United States federal government into doing something. We should have a constitutional convention over whether we should do the plan. And we have the plan inclusive, which is like a pick. We should do the AF except increasing X. We should do the AF except the part where it does this. We should pass a wealth tax except for war criminals. There's also a plan inclusive counterplan versus a plan inclusive critique, which is a part like a criticism that does the F but minus certain parts. Then we have a uniqueness counterplan, which is one of the most confusing to understand. It generates uniqueness for a disadd. For a long time, I didn't really understand what this meant, but it was best explained through a example. Let's say there's a space colonization disadd. If the United States does the plan, we can't colonize Mars. A typical AF debater would go up in the one ear and say, okay, but we're not going to be colonizing Mars anyways. This doesn't really matter. It's not a disadvantage to the plan because the status quo suffers from the same problem. But now we're saying, okay, the 1NC has lost that round and is now coming back to the next round saying, counterplan, the United States should colonize Mars. The AF foregoes doing this. I have picks. Picks defend the entirety of the affirmative except the thing that the negative picks out of. If the AF reads a plan text, for some reason, I don't know why you do this, advocating becoming party to both the ICC and UNCLOS, the neg can pick out of just doing of just UNCLOS and defend that the US should only become party to the ICC. It is basically including the plan in the counterplan, but doing less of it. It automatically completes if the pick is subjective, which is plan minus, because the AF includes the thing that the negative picks out of. But it does not compete if it's plan plus, because you can do things like I'll talk about the perm later, but the status is also incredibly important. The status of the counterplan is whether you can kick it. Kicking is basically not going for an argument. This is done by conceding defense on the argument. And the negative gets to do this a lot, and the AF also gets to do this because of things like conditionality. Conditionality is basically whether you can kick the plan, whether you can kick the counter plan. Most judges are fine with conditionality. It's like the status quo is a logical option. Most policymakers, if you were given two proposals and you didn't like either of them, you could just revert back to the status quo. It is good for argument innovation. It is good for info processing, things like that. It is bad typically because, okay, you've now the 1AR has devoted, let's say, 2 minutes to the counterplan, which you should probably not do, but has devoted 2 minutes to the counterplan, and now the 2NR is kicked out of it. 2 minutes of the 1AR are now moot, and the 2AR now has 2 other minutes to go back on and fall back on. It has basically wiped out a very large portion of the clash in a debate. That is why conditionality is typically not great in LZ, although Kondo is probably good. But dispositionality is basically saying we can kick it, but only if the AF reads certain arguments. This is a stated condition. A lot of people say no perms or theory on the counterplan. You can't kick it. You have to stick with it through the 2NR. It has to be a big extension. It is functionally the same as Kondo, but it's probably shifty slash arbitrary. Like there's no set definition on what dispositionality entails. And then uncondo is like if you have like a one-off K or something and you know you're going to go for it in the 2NR, you can just say it's uncondo. Answering counterplans. I now realize why I made these slides white, but answering counterplans comes in a couple key ways. It is the acronym SPLOT. First, you should go for solvency. The counterplan either doesn't lead to its own net benefit or can't solve the AF. You should weigh doing either part of that. You should weigh the part they can't solve against the net benefit. Then the perm. Perms are tests of competition. If the counterplan isn't competitive, the counterplan isn't really an opportunity cost to doing the plan. L is it links to the net benefit, which is the counterplan leads to the disad as well. I.e., if the counterplan says, okay, the USFG doing it will sap political energy from Congress, and then the counterplan says the USFG should do XXX other things. The USFG is still doing a plan. We can say, okay, this plank is still politically unpopular. It would still trigger the politics disad. Offense. The counterplay is actively bad. Then theory are things like the negative should not be able to fiat like things completely unrelated to the resolution. There is no basis for that in any resolutional wording. It is also not an opportunity cost to the plan. Conditionality is bad. It creates strategy skew and forces the AF to shotgun. Like there's a moral hazard to shotgun advocacies. Only you can only fiat the resolutional actor. Things like 50 states fiat are obviously illegitimate under that model. Here's an example that will perfectly explain most of the things I've just said. The AF has said we should go to McDonald's because we are hungry. The negative reads a counterplan that says we should go to Wendy's because there's an opportunity cost to doing the plan. McDonald's is unhealthy and we don't have enough money to do both. We'll attack the solvency of that counterplan. We'll say going to Wendy's isn't going to solve the fact that we're hungry. Maybe they are just like incredibly unfulfilling. There's like terrible menu options there. That outweighs the option that outweighs the net benefit of increased healthiness because it doesn't matter how healthy food is if you're far too hungry to like continue living. Perm do both. Go to McDonald's and go to Wendy's. We have the money to do so. L, it links to the net benefit. Wendy's is also unhealthy. Offense, Wendy's tastes bad. Maybe that independently outweighs a risk of it being healthy because there's more pleasure that comes from eating good, like good tasting food as opposed to eating good food. Theory, negative fiat as a voter. The negative should not be able to fiat alternate advocacies just because we could go to Wendy's does not mean we should not go to McDonald's because we are not going to Wendy's in the status quo. Permutations. They are tests of competition and not advocacies. There are different types of perms. This is perm do both. You should pretty much always say perm do both. There's no functional or textual mutual exclusivity with the plan and the advocacy. This is mostly used against things like advantage counterplans, where there is no real opportunity cost to doing the AF. Time frames slash sequencing perms. You can perm do the AF, then the counterplan. Perm do the counterplan, and then the AF. This one is severance of immediacy, things like the idea that, okay, we can do this, then the AF that solves X thing like process perm do the AF and then non-competitive parts of the counterplan. This is probably like it's not severance in the typical like sense because severance only happens when you're severing out of parts of the AF, but non-competitive parts of the counterplan you can leverage the parts that we severed out of. And then perm do the counterplan. The plan you can this is the way that the plan could be done. Process counterplans where the app did not specify a process of implementation of the 1AC. If this is a way a plan could be done, if it results in the affirmative, then you can probably perm do the counterplan. Here are some ways that you can defend the LARP model against people that are going to try to attack it. There's a couple of critical justifications. It is the most equitable, predictable, fair model of debate. This is the way that debate was intended to be. This is the way that we have created debate. It is the resolution is the only predictable stasis for rejoinder. It is the only thing that is sent out to people in advance. Like defending advantages and disadvantages of the plan is what we are told to do. Policymaking skills are good. They are content agnostic, critical thinking, the advocacy of a plan, things like defending a rigorous political proposal, comparing opportunity costs, doing in-depth research on a predictable basis are all things that are good and we should defend. Then topic education. This is unique to LD because we have so many topics and we go through all of them. This outweighs any other kind of permanent kind of structure like a theory debate. Only topic education can unlock these specific nuances of a topic, foregoing all of those in favor of the critique or in favor of like other non-germane kinds of forms of education is uniquely bad because you only get the topic these 2 months and never again. Making demands on the stage to change, things like that are potentially radical. You are like sabotaging the state. You are understanding the structures from within so you can change it from outside. Those are all things like you can say against a critique that says, okay, the state is bad. The existential risk rhetoric is good. It encourages awareness and response surrounding threats. We should be aware of things like death and things like that. All these are things that you will see a lot of critical debaters say against you. These are things that you need to know how to defend against. The LARP model is good, it is predictable, it is equitable, and it is fair. There are competitive incentives that prove that we are all here to debate about the advantages and disadvantages of the plan. Those things are all neat and dandy to kind of defend. So this is an introduction to LARP debate. We can go over a couple examples now, but thank you guys for stopping by. Now is going to be time to go through a couple examples of things like how we would organize documents. So with the 1AR, this is how a typical 1AR document would look. Obviously, file organization is a very subjective thing. It changes depending on who you are. But for me, I like to have my case at the top. I keep my 1AC in a separate file so I can send it to whoever needs it. And I don't accidentally send all my blocks as well. And then, especially like useful, you have novices on your team who might send an entire Dropbox. And then case, you have your overviews up here, you have your advantages. I like to keep my procedurals at the top because I enter into debates and I pref theory judges high, uh, like theory and large judges high. It all depends on what kind of like arguments you think your AF is most susceptible to. If you think that it's definitely going to read like topicality is going to be read, it's going to like it's vulnerable to the oil disad maybe. There's a bunch of disads that are straight turns to the AF. Things like okay, maybe it's vulnerable to process. Okay, maybe I'll take that up higher. Things like that. And then obviously you have the K and NC. You should organize your files in a way that is easy for you, but this is just an easy way to get started. And then examples of different types of arguments are the last thing we're going to be going over. Let's go over topicality. Things like, okay, the app did not defend the entire resolution. That's bad. The app extends to things not the entire topic area. They drastically expand the topic. That erases limits. which are a limit on the topic is good, you should vote negative to preserve one. Then, like, a agent, the app has not used the correct agent. It's not specified a correct agent. Thus, vote negative. That's a voting issue for limiting ground, whatever. And here's an example of a pick. It should do things like it should do the plan, but it should exclude entities that are not nationals of nuclear aggressors. It should adhere to whatever this is multiple planks, but it excludes part of the plan because the plan's rights are universal, but the counterplan's privileges aren't. It picks out of the word rights in the plan. Here's an advantage counterplan. All these different planks are going to solve different parts of the entire app. Plank 4 solves the warming. Planks 1 to 3 solve a single internal link. Plank 5 solves the UAE scenario. Here's a disad. Playing uniquely does something that is not in the status quo. You supercharge space tourism that causes space war and accidents. That's bad. Here's a consult counterplan. We should consult with Canada over whether we should do the plan. And there's a couple like reasons as to why that happens. Here's a process counterplan. It is the United States through this process should do the plan. And then it's just like we should focus this constitutional convention. It solves the case, makes the states follow on, and avoids the politics decide, right? The reconciliation package. This is an agenda politics decide. We basically pass a bill now, but the plan would cost substantial energy, and that would crush any like political bill that causes dollar hegemony collapse. These are all ways that 1NCs can be read. These are all viable arguments. These are things that should inspire you to get out there and start being a LARP debater. Honestly, if you have any questions, please email me. I truly believe that this model is a really good model, creates incredibly easy to understand debates, especially if you are in a more rural area, but you have a little more experienced judges. It is the part that basically every judge is good to evaluate. It's what most people start out with, and it's a great foundation for getting into policy debate at all levels of technical substance debate. If you have any questions, please email me. Thank you guys so much, and happy debating.